Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. It's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, aboxwithnolid, a channel I'm creating to not only just to bring awareness to the day-to-day reality trauma creates, but also delving into its mechanisms, its understandings, to build a better base, to create ways of healing and to improve the quality of our lives. Now, this is the next video in the adoption series. And it's around the fog and the transition from a felt sense into an enforced belief. Now, what I mean by that is, and again, if you're an adoptee perfectly happy with your adoption, my advice is you don't need to watch this. It's the thing of, if you don't need to ask the questions, then don't. When we go through, as I've done in the previous video, that choice, when we've gone through the development of a survival state and the reinforcement of it, we have to, or whatever we've latched onto, we turn it from a feeling, those feelings of abandonment, of loss, of terror, of cold and emptiness, of hopelessness as an infant, when you're paralyzed with fear in a box night after night, with no comfort and no interaction. And then you're bombarded with the emotional expectations of being picked up for the first real time into an adoptive placement. All these processes, in an infant, there are no words. This is why I refer to it as pre-verbal. Well, it is referred to and understood as pre-verbal. It's making sense of feelings and sensations, not deciphering words, not deciphering mannerisms and all these processes. It's trying, our body, our entire neurophysiology is trying to make sense of feelings, sensory inputs, sensations, without a lot of information to put it into perspective. You know, as anybody knows, when you're looking at little kids, their responses are extreme and very, very short. And they'll transition from having an absolute meltdown to giggling and laughing in a matter of a few seconds. But the expressions and interpretations and all the things that an infant feels is very, very pure, very, very strong. So all these felt sense, emotions and sensations, all this sensory input gets narrowed down to one or two sentences, for want of a better analogy, that become our enforced belief. And how this plays out with the fog, which is why I've said in previous videos, I've seen adoptees take some most illogical stances, and it's not their fault. It's not our fault, because we're running on that enforced belief, that statement or sentence that helped us make sense of an impossible amount of chaos and a set of experiences that no adult, any adult would go through what an adopted child, an infant and a young child goes through from removal to placement. They would be demanding counseling. There would be protest marches in the streets demanding all these support and help, all these recognitions, especially in this world today. But when you're looking at adoption, there is none. There is zero recognition of it, except in adoptee circles. Of all this chaos, has to be made sense of in some very simple sentences. And the reason they're simple is they were created by a very young child. But those sentences become layered enforced belief as we grow up. And those beliefs shape our attachment. Those beliefs shape our pursuits and our interactions. And this is why I'm raising them in this video, to bring awareness to all of you out there that have friends or in partners, relationships, or parents that are adopted. The reason some of our stances are overly out of balance is because of this. We're trying to make sense of an impossible amount of chaos. And how we've made sense of it is we've put it into a few sentences, usually actually only one. And that comes down to that impossible choice of who do we blame? Who do we pile all of this stuff onto? And more often than not, it's our biological family. It's our mother or our father or both. A lot of the time it's the system as well. For me, I moved past the blaming of my mother because my only memory of my mother is her screaming. I actually, and I've had this argument with people, but I actually remember centrally the day I was born. I've never made sense of why I just remember this woman screaming. I've always had a heightened response and reaction when women scream in that loss, that sheer emotional outburst. It drops me like a sledgehammer. And I've traced it back to it being my mother when I was taken from her. And how I was taken from her. The umbilical cord was ripped. Part of, it was there was things wrapped around my leg. There's all these sensations that I remember. And as I said, when you're looking at pre-verbal, there's the reason people go infants and children are blank slates, they don't remember it, which is complete bullshit, is we're interpreting sensation, not words. You're trying to express or explain the responses to sensations. And in pre-verbal trauma, that's one of the challenges, is our adult nervous system is trying to make sense of overwhelmingly powerful infant sensations. It's like two completely different languages. And again, in other videos, in the other components of my channel, I've delved and touched onto this. But this enforced belief is what we hold on to try to function with all of that impossible chaos that we've got as buried and as locked up in a box as we can, until we get older and it starts to break free, until we are triggered and it starts to break free. And again, as I've said a few times, these are why I'm making these videos, is to try to get this stuff out there to the world, because we need the grace and understanding, not only to get the support, but just for people to understand why we play the way we do, why we respond and enact the way we do. There are so many layers to this enforced belief, how it plays out, especially, as I said, in our attachments. And I'll do separate videos on this down the road in more detail, but just to give an overview, one of the more common things I see quite a lot of is when an adoptee has a child, their first child, and they'll either overly attach to that child or they won't connect to that child at all. It comes down to that enforced belief. Because what people don't realize is that child, for many adoptees, is the very first biological family they've ever come in contact with. The amount of times with a male adoptee has a daughter that his wife or partner finds the daughter is such a threat because of that connection. And it destroys relationships because it's the first biological family that adoptees ever met. The same when, a female adoptee has a son. And because of that cross-gender connection gets misinterpreted. It also plays out when, if a father has an adoptee has a male adoptee has a son, that same thing plays out in different formats. And the mother has a daughter, the same thing plays out in different formats. It comes down to this belief of this statement, this sentence that we have used to make sense of chaos. Remember, for want of a better analogy, the person that the world sees from an adoptee is a created person and avatar. For one, and I mean no offense, this is not about pissing people off. This is just a way of explaining. We've had to learn and create a person because we're trying to be part of a non-biological family. Our epigenetics is put to one side. All our inherited traits are put to one side to try to emulate the traits and personalities of those that are raising us. This created person runs on what we've learned, what we're exposed to. If we're not exposed to things, we don't know it, and we don't know how to respond. So all of this stuff, as I said, I will go on for hours in this, but I'll break it down into multitudes of videos. Is to make sense of impossible amounts of chaos, we create sentences. That's what we do with trauma. Now with adoption, we're making sense of things that people shouldn't have to deal with from birth and from in utero and from a very, very young age. Those sentences are what needs to be understood to be able to begin to work with this stuff. And that takes a lot, because you're challenging a very core belief. So anybody out there that is trying to work with adoptees, understand you go after those sentences. You're going after the core, very core beliefs. So tread gently and tread with understanding. For adoptees ourselves, when we go after our own core beliefs, we all perceive it as a threat. But understand that those core beliefs are just the label on the lid of a jar that contains a whole bunch of chaos. Treat that chaos with respect and tread gently. As always, I love you guys' feedback and comments. Please be respectful, please be kind and gentle, and I'll see you next time.